Like when I talk about the Palestinian question in the United States, but to remember the small joke, to begin by a small joke about once there was a woman and her little girl, they were running in the Central Park West, and suddenly there was a huge dog from the other side jumped almost on the little girl and almost ate it. And on the other side, there was a young man, was good, and he saw this and he almost jumped on the dog, almost endangered his life to save the little girl. And then the police came and said, listen, tomorrow is going to be written all American media, an American hero endangered his life to save little girl. He said, I'm not American. He said, and the New Yorker heroes. He said, I'm not New Yorker. He said, our friends, Israeli heroes. He said, no. He said, who you are? He said, I am Palestinian. He said, tomorrow is going to be written all American media. A Palestinian terrorist assassinated an American dog and links to Al-Qaeda are investigated. I don't know how this joke will be connected to the subject I'm talking about. So I didn't know how much this joke would be connected to what I'm going to talk. Maybe the connection will be reconstructed retrospectively. So I want to talk about the issue of American policy, American imperial policy in the Middle East, but with a special focus on the issue of Palestine. Again, I think most of the people, they know the obvious they mentioned, the unconditional support of the United States for Israel, supporting its policies financially, even vetoing like the softest and the most, what's supposed to be like the, a vote against Israeli settlements that the United States declared that are opposing them. But even this, was vetoed. So these things, this is the obvious. But I think there is other dimension that's even more seductive and more dangerous that the United States is cultivating, supporting, and pushing in the area of Palestine. And this is the pushing the Palestinians into neoliberal state-building logic. So in a sense, you're having a very unique case, like that neoliberal economic policy is implemented without even having a state. So developing neoliberal policies so to combine the worst aspect of direct colonial occupation and neo-political economic policies. And this is done through the Palestinian, what we call the Palestinian Authority. And all this is taking place under a very an umbrella project. It's called End the Occupation, Establishing the State, and this was launched by the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, that he himself was a World Bank worker for a long time. And this project was launched in 2009. So again, like it sounds, good, ending the occupation and establishing state. But actually, like a more critical reading will say that this is, if you really look at the bottom line of this project, is, as one writer put it, it's a trading off national liberation for neoliberalism. So in other words, what this, according to this logic, what this Palestinian Authority is telling the Palestinians, that there is actually almost a structural fundamental contradiction between national liberation and dignity and economic growth. So in order to develop an economy, you need actually to collaborate with Israel. So in a sense, like the basic rights of having workplace or having an opportunity to work is becoming a generous gift that can be provided by Israel through the Palestinian Authority. Of course, the consequences of this mentality, this way of seeing things, is devastating. In a sense, it's really trying to destroy the solidarity of the Palestinian society. It's deepening the corruption. It's deepening this sense that almost every individual is living by herself or by himself. And if you really want to achieve something, you need to go through all this network of patronage that it is connected. So in a very simple terms, if at the beginning you had only to deal with the Israeli colonial authorities, now you are dealing with actually two colonial authorities, in a sense. So you are, and this is really like one devastating development in the case of the Palestinian. So again, but this neoliberal policy in Palestine although as I said, it has its own distinctive features, but still it's a part of the larger, larger policies that have been implemented in the Middle East, especially in the late 1980s and at the beginning of the 1990s, especially in North African countries. And again, the consequences of these policies were just catastrophic. Now, actually, the revolutions that they are taking place now in the Middle East, they are, in a sense, a response to these policies. So it is not an it is not an accident that the ultimate or the main object of the anger of the masses in the Arab world are what they, in Egypt they call them the business class, the Jamal Mubarak class. So these people, this ruling class, under all this seductive language of a growth and private sector and accountability and rule of law, they ended up that you are enriching a microscopic section and impoverishing the large, the vast majority of people. So again, as in the Arab world, the security forces were another arm in order to implement this policy. You need to police the people. So there is the cultural dimension that you package these policies under this seductive language of accountability and rule of law and etc. and the police. And this issue is also important and it's important to pay special attention to it in the case of Palestine, because in general you expect, and this is what we learn all the time, that when you are living under colonial occupation, you need to get the first thing you need to get rid of colonial occupation. But now no. According to the American-Israeli PA authority, they turn things into their head, and now they are calling for the Palestinians. First, you need to deal with the internal obstacles. And what are the internal obstacles? You need to reform your security. So what do you mean by reforming your security? It means to make them more collaborative with Israel.
That's right.
So in a sense, but this in American media, they are marketed as a professionalism. So it means, like, now you have a security, a large sector that was provided. It came under the programs called the Security Sector Reform and Transformation, and this was a decision that agreed upon in the Paris Donor Conference in 2007, and it was funded by Europe, probably also with the United States, of $238 million. And again, this was directed by the Lieutenant General Keith Dayton. So in Palestine, they call them the soldiers of Dayton. So again, that they have been trained in a way, and they created to be structurally connected with Israel. So they became like the arm. They became the native arm that is going after and try to intimidate anybody who is not only doing anything against Israeli colonial occupation, but even using the language of colonial occupation. Like, we're supposed to be like in post-colonial occupation. Like, even when you are living and you are seeing the tanks and the wall and the brutality, you are supposed to live in a post-colonial occupation. So this is what's really like in just, okay. So how many minutes do you have still?
Got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Middle East minutes? Oh, no,
so good way to disarm the chair.
Okay. So what I'm witnessing, like, especially when you are really go and visit, like, go to Ramallah, for example, and go to the Palestinian villages, and town, you really begin to realize that there is a change. There is a change in the sensibility of people. Like, many people began really like to believe that there is that there is a contradiction between living with dignity and fighting colonial occupation. So you need, like, many people, they began to feel that they are living in post-politics. So in a sense that they are. So what I'm trying to say here, that through Israeli colonial occupation, supported and conditioned by the United States, through their native element, the PA, they try together to intimidate the Palestinian people, to intimidate them using the security service, and also to make their livelihood is connected, or conditioned by collaborating with the PA and deviating from a struggle. This project is supposed to create the new Palestinian. And this new Palestinian is behaving in a very particular way and speaking in a very particular way. So it means speaking of the language of globalization, and this is, so in very simple terms, to accept Israeli dictates. So when the United States is, according to its own stated policy, that they want Israel to end its colonial occupation, at least in the West Bank and Gaza, but when Israel is unable to do it, so instead of forcing Israel to adjust itself to the international consensus, the United States is trying to change the international consensus to be adopted or adjusted to Israeli policy. And this is like in this sense, unfortunately, as I said, the United States by this policy not only is not helping the Palestinians, but also it helps to invisibilize the colonial occupation, to legitimize it, and to make it from an Israeli side a luxurious occupation. So in a sense that Israel having all the benefits of this colonial occupation, controlling the land, dominating the land, confiscating the best land, the best part of the Palestinian land, at the same time they're not paying a price. So at least in the past they were paying some kind of price. But now, like the Palestinian Authority is doing the municipal job. The security service, they are financed by Europe and the United States, and the Israeli colonial occupation continues. So in this sense, and I think this is what's really like an imperial, war in the Middle East should include this deepest sense what's going on in Palestine, in addition to the obvious and conditional support of Israeli policies against the Palestinians. So this is what I would say. Thank you.